This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
So what about these voices for independence in Hong Kong?
Bill, I don't think the idea of having an independent Hong Kong will be getting anywhere. However, Hong Kong is a democracy, and we should get prepared for the worst-case scenario. For example, noises of protests calling for independence. They won't make a big deal, will they? Now, at the same time, we do respect rule of law in Hong Kong, and I believe this principle will be handled with great respect by the local authorities. If you look at how and why the 7 policemen in Hong Kong have been thrown behind the bars for their abuse of the rights of a protester in the Occupy Central movement. Now, if any politicians in Taiwan would expect to have more troubles in Hong Kong to encourage their pro-secession movement, I think they will deliver very dangerous signals to the mainland and will further damage the political foundation for having a peaceful dialogue.
This year's 2 sessions, or Liang Hui, is nearing an end, but the strong words delivered on Hong Kong independence may have lasting effect. With the Hong Kong chief executive election this year, the new policies and measures on the special administrative region in terms of politics and economy might mark a new era for the mainland Hong Kong relationship. To discuss these issues today, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Victor Gao Zhikai, current affairs commentator.
The so-called pursuit of Hong Kong independence in Hong Kong is a fallacy, and it will never be successful. On the other hand, the NPC and CPPCC have reaffirmed the one country, two system policy for Hong Kong, which will guide the future development of Hong Kong in the coming years and coming decades.
And Edward Lehman, Managing Director of Lehman, Lee and Xu.
As Abraham Lincoln famously said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. So too with the words that are coming out of the NPC and the CPPCC with regards to a one country, 2 systems will remain firm and fair going forward.
Via satellite and standing by in Hong Kong, we shall also be joined by Andrew K.P. Long, an international and independent China specialist based in that territory. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Gentlemen, Premier Li Keqiang delivered a pretty stern warning against any attempts to have independence in Hong Kong. Why did our Premier emphasize overwhelmingly the sensitivity and importance of this issue?
Well, first of all, I think the political situation in Hong Kong is changing and is becoming more and more serious and dangerous. And there are real efforts by certain groups of people to pursue the so-called Hong Kong independence. And I think they are testing water, they are pushing the edge of the envelopes. And I think China needs to be prepared for the further deterioration in the political system in Hong Kong. And that's why I think Premier Li Keqiang is absolutely right in his report on the government's work to emphasize that China will stand firm against any attempts to pursue Hong Kong independence. Hong Kong independence in itself is a fallacy. It will never be successful.
The appeal for independence in Hong Kong is getting stronger in momentum and dynamics against the background that the chief executive SAR will be elected, not exactly through the universal suffrage that many in Hong Kong would expect to see. What do you think of the background?
Well, I mean, the background, it's naive at best. I mean, you've got a bunch of people that have been opening up umbrellas and have been unfurling flags in the LegCo. And it's not really well thought out. A lot of the people who are participating in the front parts of it are young people who probably were not even born in 1997 when there was a handover, and there was no discussion at the handover whether there was going to be any independent Hong Kong. That was a foregone conclusion about what direction we're going in. What's become dangerous is what Victor Gao was talking about earlier, which is the background, and there's a movement of other people that are trying to push these young people who are largely misinformed into thinking that there's something that should be going on when real power comes from the unity of the one country, two systems.
What would be the worst case scenario if momentum for independence spins out of control?
Well, first of all, there are these groups of people who actually disregard completely the reality on the ground and continue to stir up, sentiments for the so-called Hong Kong independence. And they may resort to violence. They may actually disrupt public order in Hong Kong, creating chaos for the people. And eventually, I think the situation may even get out of control.
Under what circumstances will the PLA troops stationed in Hong Kong be mobilized to prevent the rioting?
I don't think the PLA forces will be mobilized at all under any imaginable circumstances, mainly because, according to the basic law, the public security is the responsibility of the Hong Kong SAR government. If the Hong Kong SAR government really fails in maintaining order, then the central government can resort to whatever means necessary to restore order in Hong Kong. Only as a last resort, the military forces will be utilized to do the unthinkable thing, that is to bring back security and order in Hong Kong.
A couple of weeks back, what worried observers in the mainland was policemen in their thousands converged in a square in Hong Kong to protest against the imprisonment of 7 of their colleagues because of the abuse of a protester who was involved in the Occupy Central movement. Let me cross over to in a few minutes, I'm going to cross over to Andrew, our commentator who's standing by in Hong Kong. But do you think tensions are mounting between Hong Kong and the mainland over the issue of so-called universal suffrage?
Well, yeah, I think that, again, this is largely misunderstood. There is tension with regards to that, and that was what so-called precipitated these protests about having universal suffrage. I mean, even in the United States, where they have so-called universal suffrage, I mean, hopefully everyone would get out to vote. But I mean, it's a republic, and it's representative of those people that are living in these various states. And so I think, again, a lot of this is misinformed. The movement against when the policemen were jailed is a situation that brings a little bit of tension.
Ironically, Hillary Clinton, who lost to Donald Trump, got 3 million more votes.
Right. No, that's
through, if you look at the results of the popular votes, but
not a democracy.
Right. Well, that's the point that caused much controversy.
Sure. But
Victor, excuse me, Victor, why do you think it's not time for the mainland to encourage universal suffrage in the European and American sense?
Well, first of all, mainland China wants to have universal suffrage for Hong Kong. People in Hong Kong also want to have universal suffrage. The Basic Law also wants to have universal suffrage in Hong Kong. What's the difference? What's the dividing line? Is that according to the Basic Law and as advocated by the Hong Kong government as well as the central government, they want to have universal suffrage based on the nominating process. Whereas there are certain groups of people in Hong Kong who believe that anyone can nominate him or herself without pre-qualifications or checking out on the security background of the candidate. And I think that's a major difference. I don't think in the United States you can really go away with the so-called nominating process. If we look at the Republican or the Democratic Party, the nominating process is a very, very rigorous process, and you really need to go through all the loops in the process before you can become the presidential candidate. And I think it also goes in a very similar manner in many European countries. Therefore, those people in Hong Kong who believe that you can bypass the nominating process to achieve universal suffrage is a misguided concept in itself.
We are wondering aloud why most of the dissent comes from the young people who are getting increasingly angry with the new realities in Hong Kong. Edward and Victor, what do you have to say?
Yeah, you know, I understand where they're coming from. I do understand. When you're in Hong Kong, remember there were 48 million visitors to Hong Kong last year. 41 million of them came from mainland China. Many of them are coming down there to buy things. Many of them are coming down there to enjoy all that is beautiful and good and expensive in Hong Kong. And at the same time, you've got people that are coming out of school and that cannot buy an apartment or a flat, or cannot rent an apartment or a flat and move away from their parents and be able to at least have the same kind of situation that their parents had, an upward mobility. And so I see this, there is a certain sense of haves and have-nots, and then this creates tension. And it's the same thing we saw with Brexit. It's the same thing we saw with Mr. Trump being elected president. So I understand the tension, but this is a completely different playing field, and I think that China is taking really substantial steps in order to try to increase the economy there, not harm that place. And so I think that's where this is getting a bit mixed up.
How do you look at the discrepancy or a sense of dissatisfaction for most of the young people in Hong Kong? Is it an issue of anger, jealousy, or simply dissatisfaction with the economic policies of the Hong Kong SAR government since 20 years ago? Because this year we're going to mark the 20th anniversary of the return.
Well, first of all, I think in any society, including in Hong Kong, the younger generation would need to have all the respect and all the caring and the nurturing of the society at large. In Hong Kong, it's not an exception. On the other hand, I think there are indeed problems building up in Hong Kong ever since 1997 when the handover took place. And part of the problem is that in Hong Kong, there should be no sense of complacency, and the people in different walks of life and the society at large need to really make relentless efforts to keep moving up and innovating. Because otherwise, if you become complacent, you lose the growth prospect and you are taken over, for example, by Singapore or by Shanghai, by the neighboring city of Shenzhen, etc. That's a challenge not only for the younger generation of Hong Kong, but also for the government and the society at large. On the other hand, I think the younger generation also need to get better education, they need to get better information, they need to understand the realities better, because otherwise
we
they
cannot
may
afford
be losing touch with the reality on the ground.
Right. Victor and Edward, we cannot afford to ignore the brutal fact that the legacy of the British colonialism has not been eliminated ever since 20 years ago. At the same time, no enough information or education has been provided for the younger generation ever since to let them know that they are Chinese, that Hong Kong is part of China. What went wrong?
You know, I think part of it is the judicial system. I mean, the judicial system is a curse and a blessing. I mean, the common law system can be dynamic and can give equity. It can allow financial markets to flourish and do really well. At the same time, you know, you could have a bumper sticker that would say, last one here, turn out the lights. It's a race to the bottom as far as the judiciary there is concerned. It's led by old white guys, old British guys that are still hanging out from the handover. Those that were nominated and selected as judges after that point were really people who couldn't make it in any other jurisdiction. And so it's become, no one is policing those personnel, and it seems that there needs to be a very steady look at what's going on there on these decisions, like with what happened with the police, for example, behind bars.
And I'm afraid most of those who took to the street in protest 3 years ago in the umbrella movement in Hong Kong were not even born back in 1997 when the handover took place to hand over the sovereignty, resume our exercise of sovereignty. So what can be done to reinforce the idea that the Hong Kong is and will be an integral part of the mainland?
Well, first of all, Hong Kong is an integral part of China, and this fact will remain unchanged despite of all the demonstrations sometimes take place in Hong Kong. I would characterize the situation in Hong Kong as a big political storm in a teacup, because by the end of the day, it will not change the nature of Hong Kong as part of China. However, I think we really need to devote much more attention to the education of the younger people, to listen to them, to really care about their grievances, and also do the best to create more meaningful job opportunities for them, and also integrate them into this Greater China framework. Because otherwise, if you allow certain school of thinking to prevail, that is, Hong Kong can be independent, can break away from China without any impunity, then the situation can get much worse in Hong Kong.
Thank you very much. Let me go to Andrew for his comments. He's standing by in Hong Kong. Hello, Andrew.
Yes, hi.
Good to have you back here on Dialogue. The chief executive of Hong Kong SAR,
Thank you.
Liang Chungying, was elected vice chairman of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC. What message does that deliver, and what was the immediate response from the Hong Kong media?
Well, I think that this elevation is a recognition of CY's the years of administration in Hong Kong, protecting the one country, two systems against various other sentiments which have been rising recently. One kind of sentiment, especially among the young students, is that well, Hong Kong has its own values, and they are seeing these values apparently being threatened by various other interaction with the mainland. They are not asking necessarily for all of them supporting independence, because I talked to the students myself in the university campus, but then they feel the kind of contradictions all coming up. As they, part of that is because they can't see the future very clearly. Even their professionals, they find it very difficult to get on the property ladder, and they find that the jobs are not paying well, and they also see that a lot of the policies from Beijing seem to impact on Hong Kong not very much to their liking. And of course, most of them don't understand China. They haven't been. They were born after the handover. So I think that there is one part of that. The other thing is, of course, the pan-democrats, and then all the politics is a question of power. And of course, their power is derived from opposing the establishment, of which Beijing, of course, forms a part. So I think that Hong Kong is now, the society is torn apart. But I think that it's not going to change Hong Kong's position under the one country, two systems. I think that a lot of the businesses, they realize that the opportunities lies ahead of being part of China, and of course, as China becoming more and more global, Hong Kong's position is very, very important. But I think that for example, this current election of the chief executive illustrates that this kind of contradictory forces amongst the younger generation, who do not all of them identify themselves with the mainland, and they just look at Hong Kong. It's a kind of inward-looking kind of thing.
But Andrew,
I think that this is a question of managing the contradictions.
Andrew, here is an issue that has caused much debate in Hong Kong. It's been stated in the two sessions, or Liang Hui, that candidates standing for election to the National People's Congress from the Hong Kong and Macau special administrative regions must be loyal to China. This statement has caused much debate in Hong Kong, and not very much so in Macau. Is it necessary or legitimate?
Well, I think that there is, of course, the pan-democrats, the anti-establishment camp is, of course, coming up with the argument to say that, well, all these three candidates, they are establishment candidates, but two of them were the highest ranking officials, I believe the chief executive. One's the chief secretary, the other one's the financial secretary, and they have been there for quite a number of years. So there is not a question of they are not being trusted by Beijing. But I think that also Beijing illustrates in the two sessions, highlighted the point that trust of individuals as chief secretary or financial secretary is very different from a trust as someone as the chief executive, because the chief executive has to be answerable to Beijing. Now that's all very well, but then of course the pan-democrats, they are still pushing the candidate, the financial secretary, the former financial secretary, because they feel that he's likely to listen to some of their demands. But if you look at their demands during the last electoral reform, what the pan-democrats were asking at that time was in fact the amendment of the basic law, to the extent that there are safeguards for the one country are being sacrificed for the two systems. Now, the basic law is a unique in the world. There are many safeguards for the two systems, but there are few safeguards for the one country. And what the Pan-Democrats were asking at that time is the abrogation of the safeguards for the one country. And that's something which was the absolutely red line as far as Beijing is concerned. So I think that the question of trust is whether someone could uphold these safeguards for the one country, as well as trying to realize the advantages of the two systems. So
it's a very much a symbolic gesture, Andrew. I believe all of the candidates for the election, and indeed for the Legislative Council, are required to put their hands on the Constitution of the People's Republic of China and to pledge allegiance to the country. But you are watching Dialogue with Victor Gao and Edward Lehman. We're discussing the ongoing election for the SAR Chief Executive of Hong Kong, as well as why there's been appeal for independence in Hong Kong. That's pretty dangerous and controversial. We'll be back in a short while after taking a look at these other views.
港独是直接抵触一国两制的，中央有一个宣誓是很重要，说明这个是底线，不能抵触的。
作为港区的那个人大代表的选举呢，他首先要对国家效忠中华人民共和国，那个宪法，还有因为是香港的港澳委员，他一国两制嘛，所以你也要效忠香港那个基本法，对不对？这是基本上不需要讨论的问题，我认为是。
因为作为一个人民的代表，他肯定要效忠于中华人民共和国。那么在香港我们这个立法会也有做这个宣誓，所以我感觉作为人大代表签这个声明是应该的。这个等于就把这个事情规范化，大家就能够更严肃的面对这个问题，不是说了就算，就是认认真真的。因为是代表人民的利益嘛，如果你不效忠这个国家，怎么可以当这个代表呢？所以我们是全力支持的。
如果你看前文再看下文呢，你就明白这个是一个立场是很坚定的，这个立场就是我们中国的主权，以及领土完整是必须要守的，因为从这个法律上，从文化上，从实际上来看都是不可行的。
Whoever gets elected eventually, what will be the issues of imminent concerns or of great urgency on the agenda for the new or newly elected SAR Chief Executive?
I think the new Chief Executive of Hong Kong SAR need to, first of all, rally the people in Hong Kong around the government and really do whatever that is necessary
to give
to
a
preserve the
strong
one-country
sense of
system.
being cohesive, of being together.
Definitely. I think coherence is important in Hong Kong, unity is important, solidarity is important, and I think we need to really minimize, if not eliminate, this tendency of polarization and disunity in Hong Kong. Therefore, I think either the Hong Kong SAR government or the central government here in China need to come up with more effective ways to deal with this fallacy of the so-called Hong Kong independence, because otherwise it becomes a cancer, it becomes a poison, it will cipher away the vitality of the Hong Kong society and to divide the Hong Kong society even more.
Edward, do you think this society of Hong Kong has been has fallen apart inevitably, and it's very difficult to put them together?
Well, it's going to be difficult to put them together. I think you got to have your hands steady on the wheel. I think that the new SAR Chief Executive will do that. I think you have to look for One Belt, One Road. I think that if you look at the Silk Road, that's going to be the maritime hub, that's going to be the financial hub, and so that's the direction we need to look for to be able to allow things to be positive for people, and so that there isn't this dissent. I think it's economic based.
Thank you very much. Let me get back to Andrew for his very quick comments on those who are listed and prioritized on the agenda. Who are the first in the pecking order? Who are the front runners in the campaign? Very quickly.
Well, I mean, this is what is known as a small circle election. There's only 1,194 votes. and then the vast majority of these folks are pro-establishment and pro-Beijing. So, but then there is a kind of possible backlash, which the pan-Democrats are trying to take advantage of. And as far as the pan-Democrats are concerned, they are the anti-Beijing, anti-establishment camp. They control 326 votes. But then their hope is that by pushing forward their surrogate candidate, and who seems to have a very high popularity rating, especially among the young people. I mean, it's way ahead of the Beijing's favorite, Carrie Lam. And so the pan-Democrats are hoping that in addition to 326 votes, there are those in the pro-establishment camp who may switch votes at the last minute, in the secret ballot box. Now, those people are likely to be the people whose businesses do not depend on mainland China, and then the professionals, and some of the professional, their own SMEs, and so on and so forth. But I think that it's quite likely that with the very strong signals of support during the two sessions, I think that the chances of that happening is very, very small. So I would put that the candidate would stand a very, very high chance of not only winning, but winning with a comfortable margin.
Thank you very much. And whatever circumstances, the swing votes will have the final say in deciding the victory. But what do you think of the future of Hong Kong? Will it be more chaotic? And will Hong Kong disintegrate?
No, I don't think so. I think philosophically speaking, the peace and stability in Hong Kong can be maintained, mainly because the so-called independence of Hong Kong cannot be achievable. And I think people in Hong Kong, with whatever political views, need to come to this conclusion, because it's really not a worthwhile pursuit to start with. Secondly, yes, indeed, there need to be greater democracy in Hong Kong, but you need to achieve greater democracy by relying on rule of law rather than sabotaging the rule of law. Therefore, I think there are better choices in front of the people in Hong Kong, and it's time for wisdom, vision, and courage for people in Hong Kong, rather than resorting to hopeless ideas which will end up in greater chaos.
Edward, do you think the movement of populism is getting global, and Hong Kong is no exception? Those anti-establishment forces would be part of the populist movement in Hong Kong.
Yeah, one could say that they're part of that populist movement. I mean, it is an underlying thing that has been happening worldwide. We've seen with Brexit, we've seen with Mr. Trump, and certainly now with this situation. I think that one of the answers could come from the mainland itself, integrating more Hong Kong people. There's only 350,000 people from Hong Kong that are living in the mainland right now. If you're at primary school or if you're at secondary school, you don't have free education to be able to do that. And they maybe need to look at integrating and having more people come over here in the mainland and be educated, and this might also ease tensions as well. So there's things that the mainland can do that might make it easier.
What do you think of the newly elected SCR chief executive? Do you think he's going to face a more divided society, and therefore the politics in Hong Kong will be more murky and ambiguous?
Not necessarily. I think, first of all, the majority of the people in Hong Kong are very reasonable people. Those who go onto the streets to strike, to demonstrate, are minorities of them. On the other hand, I think many people in Hong Kong do have grievances, and we need to really address these grievances in a very rational way.
And what do you think of the grievances from the DPP, the pro-secession political force, the leading party in Taiwan? They would naturally expect more unrest and troubles from Hong Kong.
Of course, there are people in many parts of the world who want to see great failures in China, including in Hong Kong, and they have different agendas and they have different political pursuits. But I think the majority of the people in Hong Kong, 8 million or so, want to have peace, stability, continued prosperity, better education for the kids, and brighter future for their families. And this will eventually be the solid rock upon which political stability will be established in Hong Kong. The next chief executive of Hong Kong need all the blessings for all of us, as well as a great deal of wisdom, courage, and a vision to make it successful for the people in Hong Kong.
And I believe the mainland will have much more to do to deliver confidence and to have confidence building between Hong Kong and the mainland. Until next time, goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today on CGTN. I'm Dongshi in Beijing. We begin with the diplomatic row between Turkey and the Netherlands. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has described Turkish sanctions as inappropriate. He said the sanctions against his government were not too bad, but the Netherlands have more to be angry about. Ankara has suspended high-level diplomatic relations after Dutch authorities prevented its ministers from speaking at rallies of expatriate Turks, sparking a row between the NATO allies. The EU has called on Turkey to refrain from excessive statements after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan accused the Netherlands of acting like Nazis.